The work of the annual conference is made up of many components. It is conducting conference business, hearing inspirational messages, honoring deceased pastors and spouses, welcoming newly ordained clergy and elders, appointing pastoral changes, and renewing friendships. Thank you for allowing me to have been your delegate this year.
Thank you, Marilyn. And tag teaming with Marilyn, you notice that the theme of our annual conference was creating difference makers. And so 3 things that I would like to lift up from annual conference was one of our peacemaking circle training. Dory and Deb and I had the privilege of meeting with Fred Van Loo a few months ago. But at annual conference, for just only an hour, we spent a day and a half with Fred, but for 1 hour, we learned about peacemaking training. And Fred Van Loo introduced the process at the Monday morning annual conference session before participants experienced a condensed version of the training. He began by explaining how restorative justice means an approach to wrongdoing through a restorative lens versus that of punitive. Van Loo told the conference session that the 3-day-and-a-half trainings he has facilitated so far were a powerful experience for him. That's the training that Deb, Dory, and I were a part of. It's an incredible phenomenon when it happens, he said, and he's learned over time that it is a process. The training focuses on people getting to know each other and developing relationships. It involves creating a space that allows trust, vulnerability, and honesty to happen, and where speaking time is equalized and there's a focus on listening. Van Loo said that when people move to the place where conflict resolution is possible, wonderful things happen. Conference session attendees viewed a video with excerpts from one of the completed trainings. In fact, it was at West Des Moines United Methodist Church that has had an interim pastor for 3 years, and they did the whole church council was part of a listening circle along with their interim pastor and the new pastor that's appointed starting July 1st. So we got to see that. In the storytelling round, they shared an early recollection of being a member of the church. With exploring the topic of the circle, participants reflected on this quote from Bishop Thomas Bickerton's book, What Are We Fighting For? God is not through with us as a church. While some long for days that have passed, I believe this is a time to make an impact on the world. Will we be known as bearers of hope? Or will we be seen as the generation that witnessed the further decline of the church? They were then asked to consider the question, what do you envision your role to be if your church is to be a bearer of hope? And another difference maker, we were introduced to Reverend Faith Fowler, who offered a teaching session. Reverend Fowler, is the senior pastor of Cass Community United Methodist Church and the executive director of Cass Community Social Services since 1994. In 1994, the church had a choice. We either move into the future or we close. And they decided to move into the future and be bearers of hope. She has served in Reverend Fowler has served in several community-focused board capacities in the Detroit area. Bishop Laurie introduced her as the ultimate difference maker. There is no one like Faith Fowler. Reverend Fowler spoke about the history of Cass Community, the church having been built in 1881. And during her tenure, the organization has undergone numerous property acquisitions and program expansion. Now, that church in 1994 that was about ready to close, currently now, in the Cass Social Services, has 100 employees and uses 5,000 volunteers a year. They also have an initiative of building tiny houses for the homeless in Detroit. And finally, the Healthy Church Initiative, the new vision and mission of the United Methodist of the Iowa Annual Conference. First of all, there have been 8 district operational teams that have been formed through a process through SLI. Every time they meet, they share experiences of love, learning, and leadership. That's what we're about: loving, learning, leading. As a result of the statements of mission, the mission of the mission of the United Methodist Church is to develop disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. But the specific mission of the Iowa Annual Conference is to inspire, equip, and connect communities of faith to cultivate world-changing disciples of Jesus Christ. The vision of the Iowa Annual Conference is God's hope for the world made real through faithful leaders, fruitful communities, and fire-filled people. And our wildly wonderful goal states all United Methodist churches in Iowa will have a process of intentionally forming disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world by the year 2020. Marilyn read the names of 8 churches that closed this year. And one of the things that many people may not be aware of is that the conference doesn't close churches. The churches decide that it's time to close. I read about a church, a United Methodist church this past week in Massachusetts. And they had gotten down to four members, 4 active worshipers. And they decided it was time. It was time. And so they had the conversations with the conference trustees and the district superintendent. And they decided that there was still a mission field in that place. And they said, it's time to close, but we're going to send you a planter. Well, what's a planter? To plant a new ministry in that same place. And now it's called Simple Church. Simple United Methodist Church. It's part of a growing network of what are called dinner churches. They meet just like in the first century. And first, second, and third century, they meet in homes. And they meet around the table. And Simple Church, you can just look it up, Simple Church, United Methodist Church, in Massachusetts. They meet every Thursday night around the table. They have a meal together. They have communion. And they talk about the scriptures. And they sing hymns and spiritual songs. We just heard about that this past week, hymns and spiritual songs. So how does this all fit in to Dysart United Methodist Church, and how does it fit in to us being difference makers? And how does it fit in to Jesus and family values? How does that all fit in together? Well, first of all, we're difference makers because we not only pay our apportionments, but we are third-mile recipients of the Rainbow Covenant. Now, many people have heard Becky talk about the Rainbow Covenant, and sometimes we think of it in terms of, well, it's like $1 per member and $6 per member, and we raise a whole bunch of money and it goes out. Well, what Rainbow Covenant, what it was established to do, was to help congregations look at ministry close at home, in their own church. That's the first mile. What happens the first mile? Where does that apportionment dollars go? Well, 84% of it comes right back to the church. Part of it goes to have conferences that renew us. That video that you saw, that was our opening video for our opening, for our worship at annual conference. And that was done by volunteers. Now, we did have to have pay for some technical people to put it together, and that would be our conference staff. We do have a part-time conference, couple of part-time conference staff people that help get the message out, help put it together to get the message out. Because things are not as simple as in Jesus' time when they were walking around and telling the stories, although that's the basic element of being able to tell the story. But Rainbow Covenant was to help us look at what's happening in our state, what's happening in our country, and what's happening around the world. The largest area that we give is to World Hunger and Poverty Ministries, because that's what Jesus was about. So, on behalf of the church, this is what we get. We get this and we get this, and we'll post it. But this is for our Rainbow Covenant. You know, when people talk about family values, nobody is quoting from today's gospel reading. In fact, today's gospel reading, for I've come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and her daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's household. We want to skip over it, don't we? We want to skip over to verse 40. If you skipped over to verse 40, it says, whoever welcomes you, welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me, welcomes the one that sent me. And we want to skip right over to that, because isn't hospitality the thing that we most want to offer? After all, isn't hospitality one of the central themes of the Old Testament? But it's probably not fair to skip over the verses we don't like. Besides, there would be so many verses we'd be skipping over. But why would Jesus say such a thing? Perhaps scholars can help us here. Most New Testament scholars agree that this passage reflects the reality of what was happening in Matthew's community of believers. Families were being divided over Jesus. Can you imagine your family, how they would react when they said, I'm leaving my livelihood to follow this guy? Can you imagine? Never mind whether you believed in his theology or his practice. The fact that you were just going to leave your livelihood would cause some consternation, I would think. But Matthew wrote out of this reality of pain and division. And as one New Testament scholar says, verses 34 through 36 are presented in the Semitic perspective that views results as purpose. That is, the result, family division, is presented as though it was Jesus' purpose. This is his purpose, to divide. Perhaps that sounds like an attempt to get Jesus off the hook, to temper Jesus' harsh words. This interpretation may be wrong, but we don't have to agree to see that these words were encouraging to many. Those rejected by their families received assurance that following Jesus was more important, more life-giving than family ties. And that was encouraging. But is this the only thing Jesus said about the family? Did he tell about their values? Well, Jesus spoke clearly against adultery. Even thinking about it was not to be done. And Jesus' teaching about divorce called both men and women to stay married, and he allowed for no legal loopholes. And Jesus quoted the Genesis creation story to uphold lifetime monogamous relationships. But Jesus also said some very strange things about families, including his own. Jesus commended people for leaving families behind. James and John up and left their father to follow Jesus. When someone asked to tend to his father's burial before following Jesus, Jesus said, "Follow me and let the dead bury their dead." Not only harsh, but impossible, it would seem. When Jesus' mothers and brothers wanted to speak to him, Jesus replied, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" There's a great hymn in the black hymnal that says, "Who are my brothers and who are my sisters?" And pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mothers, here are my mother, and here are my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." It became clear that Jesus was bringing a new definition of family, beyond the bonds of blood and tradition. He treated outcasts as family. He called his disciples children and little ones. And it's hard to find a portrait of the Christian family in the life and teaching of Jesus. Indeed, it's hard to find such families in the Bible. I realize I'm moving into dangerous waters here, but please stay with me. We hear so much about Christian family values that we assume, that we could just turn to almost any page of Scripture and we would find them. We just have to open it up and we would find it. We should also be able to find many examples of what a Christian family is like. But think about it. What biblical family would you choose as your model? Would you choose Abraham, who fathered children by two women, Hagar and Sarah? Would you choose Jacob, who married Leah and Rachel, and also had children by two concubines? David and Israel's greatest king will hardly do. He was married. And so was Bathsheba when he took her for himself. And that's a polite way of saying something else. And David went so far as to make sure that her husband was killed in battle. And the man and the woman who sing passionate sexual love for each other in Song of Songs were not even married. And one of the most beautiful portraits of love in the Bible is the relationship between David and Jonathan. Love remembered in David's moving lament when Jonathan was killed in battle. You find it in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26, when he says, "I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women." But those stories are from the Old Testament, we say. Then who would we choose from the New Testament as our example of family? Joseph certainly loved Mary, but we know little about their life together except that they had a teenage son that caused them well, actually, he wasn't even a teenager yet. He was only 12 years old, and he caused them terrible distress when he didn't even follow them home from the temple, and he stayed. We do have evidence that one disciple, Simon Peter, was married because, remember, Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. And there's actually remnants of the house in the Middle East, in Palestine, that supposedly was the mother-in-law's house. But that doesn't help us much for our average family, does it? Timothy, one of St. Paul's dearest co-workers, had a Greek father and a Jewish mother. We hear little about his father, but Paul praises Timothy's grandmother, Eunice, and his mother, Lois, for teaching him the faith. Was Timothy raised by these two women, Eunice and Lois? Maybe. We know of at least two married couples in the book of Acts. Remember, Priscilla and Aquila were commended as teachers and leaders. But then we got Ananias and Sapphira. Remember, they hoarded money. that they should have been given to the church and they fell dead at the apostles' feet. That is quite a story. Now, marriage didn't cause their death, but certainly didn't assure faithful discipleship. It may seem strange, but it's almost impossible to find a traditional Christian family in the Bible. So what are we to do? But someone will surely protest. The Bible wasn't written as a sacred version of Father Knows Best, and I'm dating myself because many of you know this Father Knows Best, but some of you are way too young for that. The Bible isn't like those magazines in the grocery check line that says 7 simple steps to the perfect family. No, the Bible isn't like that at all. Then how can some people speak with such absolute certainty about Christian family values? Where did they find them? And how do they know? If we're honest with ourselves, and I hope we really will be, we will acknowledge that our family values are shaped by the many memories of our own childhood, whether it was happy or whether it was tragic. It will be shaped by the neighborhood in which we grew up in. It will be shaped by our personal reactions to people that are different. Our relationship with gay folk, or our relationship with, or our lack of contact with people of different races and cultures. It will be affected by our Sunday school lessons. All of these things have shaped us and our values. And because of these factors, we feel that some families are better than others. We feel some cannot be valued at all. But personal feelings are not the same as Christian values. Our sense of fairness may be a far cry from the biblical prophets. Our biblical prophets call for justice, and our rigid family boundaries not even close to the teachings of Jesus. We need to be at least as humble as St. Paul was when he struggled with the Corinthian church over matters of sexual morality. He wrote, "Now concerning virgins," he wrote, "I have no command from the Lord, but I give my opinion." Such humble honesty is refreshing. If we claim, which we do, authority from the Bible, we need to know what the Bible says. We need to open it up. We need to read it in light of our experience, our tradition, and our reason, in light in community. And we need to know what it doesn't say. So if we know what it says, we know what it doesn't say. Jesus said many things about families, including his own. He did say lots of things about families. Some of what Jesus said will affirm our feelings and will affirm our opinions and our experiences and our tradition about families. But Jesus said other things that are going to challenge every assumption and cause us to feel uneasy. He realized that the ultimate importance of family and expanded the definition of what a family could be. To many of this was threatening, it was divisive, but to others, it was this huge invitation to new life and forgiving love that they never knew before. This past week, with the Hoppy family, the community responded in huge ways. People gathered, they had events, they continue, and individuals responded. But being part of a faith family is saying, what will I do? But what will my, and, not but, and what will my faith community be doing? That's the next thought. Being part of a church family is to say, and what is my church family doing? And how can I make that happen? Because we're part of a bigger family. Friends, there is discord in the world, some of which is unnecessary, some of which is unavoidable, and some of which is the cause of truth. In all of these situations, we are called to live with the kind of integrity that values both truth and the person with whom we're debating truth. God knows about that discord. God knows every sparrow. God knows every discord. God knows about our divisions. And the good news is that Jesus is with us as we live through it. In fact, the end of Matthew's gospel, it says, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the close of the world," the close of the age. Mother Teresa said, "The openness of our hearts and minds can be measured by how wide we draw the circle of what we call family." Thanks be to God. Amen. As we come to a time of prayer, what good thing happened to you this week? What good thing happened to you this week?
Well, we have our two sweet granddaughters again with us. We're joyful for that. And the other thing, my sister had another MRI about a week ago and came back with a clean bill of health, and I'm terrifically happy for that.
Generous God.
This past week on Thursday, we had a spiritual retreat here. That's what it's called. It was put on by the conference.
Yes, the Conference Task Force on Spiritual Formation.
Yes, and there were like 4 representatives. I don't remember all their names, but it was held right here, so it was in our own backyard, and it was a joy to me. We studied the Psalms and what they can mean to you, what you can glean from them, and it was just a good event to attend. There will be a 5-day retreat this coming October, and they even talked about having a 3-day, kind of a compromise for those that don't want to commit 5 days of their life to a retreat. So it was a joy. It was fun.
Thank you. Yes, that's one of the conference task force that I'm part of, and I'm really grateful. Thank you, Tom, for mentioning it. And also, Lynn went to the 3, when I was part of the leadership team of the 3-day, the first 3-day we had at Wesley Woods, and Lynn went with me, and now she's on the task force because she was totally sold by that. And all this comes out of, by the way, the upper room of the United Methodist Church. Any others? Okay, Lowell.
Yes, this past week, we had the fortune to go with some people to visit the Ark Encounter in Kentucky and the Creation Museum. And I think it's a worthwhile trip, and it's an amazing, amazing thing. Makes you think about a lot of things that Noah and his family had to endure to go through this tremendous thing, and it's just incredible. And I got to spend it with my family, and I think family is those that are in our lives that are close to us that we do things with. And I think that's what Jesus meant. That your family are those who you are are around with, who you live your life, share your things with. No matter where you are in company with your family. So I can relate to some of that, but some of the other things I can't